In the dense, humid jungles of Southeast Asia, where vegetation intertwines to form a green, impenetrable labyrinth, where every shadow hides a mystery and every sound echoes like an ancient warning, lies a world few truly know. A world where nature reigns supreme, indifferent to human conflicts, indifferent to the wars that have forever marked the history of humanity. This is a documentary about creatures that inhabited the same territory where young American soldiers served during one of the most turbulent periods of the 20th century. Creatures that, although small compared to the challenges of conflict, posed a silent, constant, and worrying threat. We're talking about Vietnam's giant centipedes, poisonous arthropods that made the soldiers' experience even more challenging, adding another layer of danger to an already hostile environment by nature. Before we continue this fascinating and frightening journey, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel and leave the time you're watching this documentary in the comments. Your participation is essential so that we can continue to bring content like this. The Vietnam War, which officially lasted from 1955 to 1975, was a conflict that profoundly marked not only international politics but also the collective psyche of an entire generation. When the first American soldiers set foot on Vietnamese soil, they hoped to meet the challenges of the military conflict. What many didn't expect was that nature itself would become a formidable adversary. Vietnam's jungles, with their extraordinary biodiversity and unforgiving tropical climate, harbored dangers not found in any military manual. Among these dangers, giant centipedes occupied a special place among the natural challenges that haunted the nights and days of the troops. To truly understand the magnitude of this threat, we must first understand what these extraordinary creatures are. Centipedes, known scientifically as chilopods, are arthropods that have evolved over millions of years to become efficient predators. Unlike insects, which have 6 legs, centipedes can have 15 to 170 pairs of legs, depending on the species. In Vietnam, the most common and dangerous species belong to the genera Scolopendra, known for their impressive size and potent venom. These creatures can reach lengths of over a foot, with segmented bodies ranging in color from reddish-brown, dark green, and bright black. Each segment of the body has a pair of legs, and the first legs, just behind the head, were evolutionarily modified to become poisonous claws called forcipules. Forcipules are the main weapons of these nocturnal predators. Connected to poison glands, these structures pierce the skin of their prey and inject a complex mixture of toxins that causes severe pain, local paralysis, and in some cases, severe systemic reactions. Vietnamese centipede venom contains a combination of proteolytic enzymes, neurotoxins, and components that affect the cardiovascular system. For small animals like rodents, lizards, and insects, a centipede bite almost certainly means death. For humans, although rarely fatal, the bite represents an extremely painful experience that can last for days and leave significant after-effects. Imagine now the plight of a young American soldier, only 19 or 20 years old, recruited from a small town in the Midwestern United States, where the greatest natural danger was perhaps a rabid squirrel or an angry bee. Suddenly, this young man finds himself transported to a completely alien environment, where the humidity is so intense that the sweat never dries completely, where the heat is suffocating even at night, where the vegetation is so dense that sunlight rarely reaches the forest floor. In this environment, each movement must be calculated carefully. And then, during a night patrol or when he wakes up in his makeshift tent, the soldier feels something crawling over his leg, over his arm, over his neck. The flashlight reveals a creature that appears to have emerged from its worst nightmares. A long, jointed body, dozens of legs moving in coordinated waves, long antennae groping the air, and jaws that glow in the dim light, ready to bite. Vietnam War veterans' accounts are replete with encounters with these creatures. At hastily built military bases on the edge of the jungle, centipedes were frequent and unwanted visitors. They invaded tents, hid in boots, wrapped themselves in clothes left on the damp ground. Soldiers quickly learned to shake their boots every morning before putting them on, to check their sleeping bags before going to bed, to never leave equipment lying on the ground overnight. Even with all these precautions, encounters were inevitable. The Vietnamese giant centipede is a nocturnal creature par excellence, hunting in the darkness when soldiers were most vulnerable, when fatigue from days of intense work finally allowed for a few hours of restless sleep. Scolopendra subspinipes, one of the most common species in Vietnam, is particularly aggressive when it feels threatened. Unlike many animals that prefer to flee when confronted, this centipede often assumes a defensive posture, raising the anterior part of its body and preparing its forcipules for attack. Its speed is astonishing for a creature of its size. In a split second, she can launch herself against what she perceives as a threat, digging into her venomous claws with surgical precision. The pain of the sting is described by many as similar to being hit by a red-hot iron, an intense burning sensation that spreads quickly throughout the affected area. Medical records from U.S. military units in Vietnam document hundreds of cases of centipede bites. Symptoms varied significantly depending on the size of the centipede, the amount of venom injected, and the individual sensitivity of the soldier. In milder cases, the victim experienced severe localized pain, swelling, redness, and a burning sensation that could last 12 to 24 hours. In more severe cases, symptoms included nausea, vomiting, fever, severe headache, tachycardia, extreme anxiety, and occasionally local necrosis of the tissue surrounding the bite. Soldiers who were stung often had to be evacuated from their positions, not only because of physical discomfort, but also because the pain was so intense that it made it impossible to perform their military duties. What made these creatures particularly problematic was their abundance and ubiquity. There was not a single environment in the Vietnamese jungle where centipedes could not be found. They inhabited the soil covered with decaying leaves, hid under fallen logs and rocks, explored caves and burrows abandoned by other animals. During the rainy season, when low-lying areas flooded, centipedes were forced to seek higher ground, which often put them in direct contact with human facilities. Military bases, bunkers, trenches, all these places became havens not only for soldiers, but also for dozens of arthropod species, including the fearsome centipedes. The ecology of these creatures is fascinating when examined from a dispassionate scientific perspective. Centipedes are carnivorous predators that play an important role in controlling populations of other invertebrates. They hunt an impressive variety of prey, including crickets, cockroaches, spiders, scorpions, and even small vertebrates like geckos and baby rodents. Their hunting technique is brutal and efficient. Using its sensitive antennae to detect vibrations and odors, the centipede locates its prey in complete darkness. Once prey is identified, the centipede moves quickly, using its many legs to maintain balance and speed on uneven terrain. When within range, the forcipules close in on the prey like a steel trap, injecting venom that quickly paralyzes the victim. For American soldiers, especially those assigned to deep reconnaissance operations in the jungle, centipedes represented more than just a painful nuisance. They were a constant reminder that they were operating in fundamentally hostile territory, where even the smallest creatures could cause significant damage. On long-duration missions, where small units spent weeks in dense vegetation, encountering centipedes was almost guaranteed. Soldiers reported having to remain motionless for hours on end while a giant centipede crawled slowly on their legs, their arms, because any sudden movement could provoke an attack by the arthropod. American military training, as comprehensive as it was, simply did not prepare soldiers for this kind of psychological challenge. Facing combat situations, no matter how difficult, is something that can be mentally processed within a recognizable military context. But waking up in the middle of the night to a foot-long alien creature crawling inside your shirt is an experience that transcends tactical training and touches on primordial fears deeply rooted in the human psyche. Many veterans, decades after the end of the war, still reported recurring nightmares about giant centipedes invading their personal spaces, crawling over their bodies in their sleep. Military medicine at the time had limited resources to treat centipede bites. Standard protocol involved cleaning the wound, applying cold compresses to reduce swelling, and administering painkillers to control pain. In more severe cases, where there were signs of an allergic reaction or secondary infection, antibiotics and antihistamines were prescribed. However, the reality on the battlefield often meant that soldiers had to endure the pain with minimal resources. Powerful painkillers were reserved for more serious injuries. A centipede bite, however painful, rarely justified the use of these precious resources. Soldiers learned to endure, to apply their own improvised compresses, to continue their missions even when each movement renewed the burning sensation at the sight of the sting. Interestingly, local Vietnamese populations had a very different relationship with these creatures. For them, centipedes have been part of the natural environment since time immemorial. Vietnamese children learned from an early age to identify and avoid these creatures, just as they learned to swim in rivers or climb trees. Traditional Vietnamese medicine even attributed medicinal properties to certain parts of centipedes, although these practices were viewed with skepticism by Western medicine. Some traditional healers claimed that the poison, when processed properly, could be used to treat arthritis and other inflammatory conditions. These beliefs, grounded or otherwise, demonstrated an intimate familiarity with the local fauna that American soldiers simply did not possess. The cultural difference in the perception of these creatures created interesting situations during interactions between American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians. While an American soldier would react with horror and revulsion upon encountering a giant centipede, a Vietnamese farmer would simply grab a piece of bamboo, lift the creature, and throw it away from his home with calm, efficient movements, as if dealing with a rock in the way. For the Vietnamese, this was simply part of life in the jungle. For the Americans, it was further evidence that they were operating in a completely alien world, where even the basic rules of interaction with nature were different. Vietnam's giant centipedes also played a role in local folklore and superstitions. Some villages believed that finding a centipede indoors was an omen of coming changes, neither necessarily good nor bad, but significant. Other stories spoke of gigantic centipedes, the size of snakes, that inhabited the deepest and most unexplored parts of the jungle. While these stories were clearly exaggerations, they reflected the respect and fear these creatures inspired even in people who had lived with them their entire lives. From a biological point of view, centipedes represent an extraordinarily ancient evolutionary lineage. Fossils of creatures similar to modern centipedes have been found in rocks dating back more than 400 million years, meaning these creatures were hunting in Earth's primeval forests long before dinosaurs appeared. His anatomy changed relatively little over this immense period, a testament to the effectiveness of his basic body design. The segmented body allows for extraordinary flexibility, enabling the centipede to writhe through tight crevices and navigate complex terrain. The multiple legs provide stability on uneven surfaces and allow for surprising speed when needed. The sensory system, although simple compared to that of vertebrates, is perfectly suited for a nocturnal predator that hunts primarily by tact and chemical detection. During the war, there were several attempts by the American military command to educate troops about the dangers of local fauna, including centipedes. Pamphlets were distributed showing illustrations of common venomous creatures, with instructions on how to avoid them and what to do if bitten. Military doctors gave lectures to newly arrived soldiers warning of scorpions, spiders, snakes, and, of course, centipedes. However, no amount of classroom training could truly prepare someone for the visceral shock of encountering one of these creatures in reality. Seeing a black and white illustration in a pamphlet is one thing. Waking up to a 5-inch live centipede crawling over your face is something else entirely. Living conditions at military bases and outposts often exacerbated the centipede problem. Many facilities were built quickly, with improvised local materials. Dirt floors, wooden structures with gaps and holes, palm leaf roofs, all these features, although practical from a logistical point of view, created the perfect environment for arthropods of all kinds to establish themselves. Centipedes, in particular, loved the dark, damp spaces beneath the wooden platforms where soldiers slept, or in the piles of equipment stored in the corners of tents. During the day, when centipedes were generally inactive, they remained hidden in these refuges. At night, when they went out hunting, inevitably crossed paths with soldiers who were also awake serving night guards or simply unable to sleep due to stress and anxiety. A particularly disturbing aspect of giant centipedes is their ability to move silently. Unlike insects like grasshoppers or beetles, which make audible noises when moving, a centipede can traverse an entire room without producing a single detectable sound. Its soft legs and fluid locomotion allow it to approach a sleeping person without warning. The first sign of its presence is usually the sensation of something crawling over the skin, and at that point, it is too late to avoid the panic that inevitably follows. Soldiers developed the habit of sleeping with flashlights within reach, because waking up in total darkness without knowing exactly what is about you is a psychologically devastating experience. The cumulative psychological impact of living under constant challenge, both from conflict and from natural hazards such as centipedes, cannot be underestimated. War stress is already immensely damaging to mental health. Adding to this the constant worry about poisonous creatures crawling on your belongings, your food, your bedding, created an atmosphere of paranoia and hypervigilance that was mentally exhausting. Some soldiers developed genuine arthropod phobias as a result of their experiences in Vietnam, phobias that persisted decades after their return to the United States. The sound of something crawling in the dark, the unexpected touch of something on the skin during the night, these stimuli could trigger intense panic reactions even in completely safe environments. Survival strategies developed by soldiers to deal with centipedes varied from person to person and unit to unit. Some soldiers became almost obsessive in their checking routines, meticulously inspecting every inch of their equipment several times a day. Others adopted a fatalistic attitude, accepting that encounters with centipedes were inevitable and simply dealing with them when they occurred. There were also those who developed a morbid curiosity about these creatures, studying their behavior, collecting specimens, and trying to better understand these arthropods. This scientific approach, though unusual, sometimes helped reduce fear through knowledge. In terms of field treatment for centipede bites, soldiers developed several improvised remedies in addition to official medical protocol. Some applied cigarette tobacco directly to the wound, believing it helped neutralize the venom. Others used leaves from certain local plants that veteran soldiers or Vietnamese guides claimed had calming properties. The effectiveness of those practices was doubtful from a medical point of view, but they provided a sense of control over the situation, which in itself had psychological value. The simple act of doing something, anything, in response to a sting helped reduce the feeling of helplessness that naturally accompanied being the victim of a poisonous creature. Seasonality also played a significant role in the frequency of centipede encounters. During the monsoon season, when torrential rains flooded large areas of the jungle, centipedes were forced to seek higher ground and dry shelter, which often meant military installations. During these periods, reports of stings increased dramatically. Soldiers who passed through Vietnam's rainy season described nights when it was necessary to kill dozens of centipedes trying to enter the tents, lured by the promise of a dry environment. The ground around military installations was literally covered with the corpses of centipedes killed during these seasonal invasions. Interestingly, Vietnamese giant centipedes were also occasionally seen as unlikely allies. At some military bases, soldiers observed that the presence of centipedes appeared to reduce the population of other equally undesirable pests, such as rats and cockroaches. Centipedes actively hunted these creatures, and some soldiers learned to tolerate the presence of centipedes in certain areas precisely because they kept other problems at bay. This was a Faustian bargain, no doubt, but in an environment where every problem had to be prioritized, some soldiers decided it was better to deal with centipedes than with rodent infestations that could spread even more dangerous diseases. Photographic documentation of the time occasionally shows disturbing images of giant centipedes captured by soldiers. In some of these photos, the creatures are held next to rulers or other objects to demonstrate their impressive size. Others show centipedes preserved in alcohol jugs, specimens that some soldiers sent home as tangible proof of the challenges they faced in the jungle. These images, when viewed decades later, have a surreal quality, freezing creatures in time that seem to belong more to a science fiction film than to documented reality. Modern scientific research into centipede venom has revealed fascinating compounds that have potential medical applications. Some components of the venom have demonstrated analgesic properties, ironically being able to be developed into pain control medications. Others have antimicrobial activity and are being studied as possible new antibiotics in an era of increasing bacterial resistance. This is an interesting twist. Creatures that caused so much suffering to soldiers in Vietnam may eventually contribute to medical treatments that will alleviate the suffering of future generations. Nature, as always, is complex and full of paradoxes. From an ecological point of view, Vietnam's giant centipedes are important indicators of the health of the jungle ecosystem. As top predators in the invertebrate food chain, Their presence and abundance reflect prey availability and overall habitat integrity. The areas of the Vietnamese jungle that were heavily affected during the war showed significant declines in centipede populations, as well as many other species. In the decades since the end of the war, as the forest has slowly regenerated, centipede populations have also recovered, a sign that the ecosystem is gradually healing from the wounds of war. For soldiers who survived the war and returned to the United States, the memories of Vietnamese centipedes remained vivid. At veterans' meetings, stories about encounters with these creatures are told and retold, each narrative adding layers of detail that have grown over the years. Some veterans report that, even decades later, they can't see a common garden centipede without feeling a flash of memory and adrenaline, their body instinctively reacting to the visual trigger. This is a form of traumatic memory that is rarely discussed compared to combat-related post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's equally real for those who experience it. American soldiers' experience with Vietnamese centipedes also raises broader questions about the relationship between humans and nature in conflict contexts. Modern warfare tends to be conceptualized in purely human terms: strategy, tactics, technology, politics. But the reality experienced by soldiers in the field necessarily includes interactions with the natural environment. And this environment is not a passive backdrop. It is an active participant that imposes its own rules and challenges. Centipedes made no distinction between people. They simply existed, hunted and defended themselves when threatened, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding around them. There is something deeply humiliating, in a philosophical sense, about being threatened by a creature so fundamentally different from us. A centipede has no concept of war, of ideology, of nationality. It operates on a completely different plane of existence, guided by instincts shaped by millions of years of evolution. For a soldier with modern military training, being reduced to a state of primal fear by a complex brainless creature or any understanding of human conflict is an eye-opening experience. It reveals the fundamental fragility of the human condition, our vulnerability in the face of the forces of nature that we cannot negotiate or reason with. Vietnam's giant centipedes continue to fascinate researchers and nature enthusiasts to this day. Scientific expeditions to the region regularly document these species, studying their ecology, behavior, and the chemical complexities of their venom. Environmental education programs in modern Vietnam teach respect for these creatures as important components of the ecosystem, rather than simply pests to be exterminated. This shift in perspective reflects a growing understanding that all life, however alien or frightening it may seem, has its place in the intricate web of biodiversity. To conclude this journey through the jungles of Vietnam and the experiences of the soldiers who encountered its most formidable creatures, it's worth reflecting on what these stories teach us. They remind us that war has dimensions that go beyond purely military aspects. They show us that nature is indifferent to human conflicts, operating according to its own immutable rules. They illustrate the human capacity for adaptation and survival even in the most challenging circumstances. And perhaps more importantly, they remind us of our smallness in the face of the vastness and complexity of the natural world. The young soldiers who faced not only the challenges of the conflict, but also the giant centipedes of the Vietnamese jungles, demonstrated a courage and resilience that deserves to be recognized and remembered. Their experiences, disturbing as they are part of the historical record of one of the most significant conflicts of the 20th century. And centipedes, these ancient and relentless creatures, continue their existence in the jungles of Southeast Asia, oblivious to the impact they have had on so many human lives, continuing their eternal role as nocturnal predators in the rainforests. As we look back on these events that occurred decades ago, we are reminded that the natural world is filled with wonders and dangers in equal measure. The same forests that harbor creatures that fill us with dread also support ecosystems of unparalleled beauty and complexity. The same centipedes that challenge soldiers also play crucial roles in controlling populations of other invertebrates while maintaining ecological balance. Nature is neither good nor bad. It simply is, operating on principles that precede human existence and will continue long after our species ceases to exist. And so, as we close this documentary, we carry with us not only stories of fear and survival, but also a renewed appreciation for the complexity of the natural world and the resilience of the human spirit. May we always remember those who served in such difficult circumstances, and may we continue to explore and understand the natural world with curiosity, respect, and humility. May the Lord God bless all those who have gone through these traumatic experiences and who find peace in their memories, knowing that their courage and sacrifice will not be forgotten.